Hello, everybody. This is another episode of like we like to call the Chase with Jace. I'm your host, Jace Lejeune, and I'm joined by Bryce Koon of 247 Sports, beat writer for LSU, and really Bryce Glenn, the 247 game, do an excellent job with the LSU beat and giving you a lot of insight on the LSU Fighting Tigers. And Bryce, welcome to the show, my man. And we've been talking for a while, and good to finally have you on the show.
I appreciate it, Jace. Yeah, I watched the episode with Glenn, so here's to one upping my coworker. Let's see if we can get a better one. No, appreciate the time, man, and always good down to talk some football and especially LSU.
Absolutely, Bryce. And well, a wild one we can discuss, right? I mean, LSU, Ole Miss. It just felt like there was a Hollywood director or something in like maybe in the press box or something because I don't know if you can write a better game or a better script than what it was on Saturday night. Obviously celebrating 100 years of Tiger Stadium in Death Valley, and there's been a lot of classics, especially involving Ole Miss. The Billy Cannon run, really sticks out, and a lot of really entertaining football games. But this one, it was a perfect way to cap off 100 years in Tiger Stadium. And Bryce, you're actually on the field when just the chaos ensued at the end. So I just want, before we get into the game and everything, your experience being out there on the field Saturday night in Death Valley with the crowd storm at the end. Just your thoughts on being there in person.
Yeah, I was talking about this on the radio the other day, and I think I've tweeted this, and I think we were all kind of talking about it at the press conference the other day. As a guy who didn't grow up in Louisiana around LSU football, I grew up in the SEC country, grew up over in the state of Georgia. Like I've been in good environments. Obviously, growing up and watching the SEC on CBS at 3:30 and watching all SEC football games, about LSU and about Tiger Stadium. But to experience that on Saturday, like I think a lot of people, Jason, you can maybe speak to this a little bit. A lot of people kind of just look at LSU people and LSU fans like, well, of course you think your place is the best or the hardest place to play in the country. And like I'm telling you as an outsider, like as someone who
Mhm.
didn't grow up here, like
Right.
it is real. Like it's palpable. Like you can feel it. And kind of going back, we're allowed to kind of take the field, and I said take the field as if we're allowed to play, but we're allowed to get
Right.
on the sideline
Right.
with around 6 minutes remaining, and you know to be able to experience the final drive
Mhm.
in regulation and then experience overtime. I mean, you get a sense of what Jackson Dart and that Ole Miss offense was having to deal with, and
Mhm.
I think fans, I think media members, we all need to kind of remember like these are
Mhm.
18 to 23, 24-year-old kids that are
Right.
having to deal with this. It's hard. And so
Mhm.
I really do mean it. I know a lot of people say, well, of course LSU fans think they're the best place to play in the country. That crowd had a real impact, and
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I think if you put that game in Oxford, if you put that game in a neutral site, I don't know if LSU wins the football game, Jace. I mean, I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
it's one of the few places in the country that home field advantage really does make an impact.
Mhm. Yeah, and you saw it. You especially
Mhm.
saw it. I mean, the atmosphere was great from before kickoff. The energy was great before kickoff, but you knew in overtime, if you're able to get this game in overtime or really put it in the fourth quarter, what LSU was able to do, the crowd can make a difference, and the
Right.
crowd actually turned out to be a difference in that overtime period. Especially with Ole Miss having the football, you can tell like there was some miscommunication. You can tell the crowd was really
Yeah.
rattling Jackson Dart in the offense pre-snap. They had to burn a timeout. There was a false start. There was a holding penalty. So you can tell the crowd really put it over the top for LSU in the overtime period.
Yeah, and just kind of add to that. The Jackson Dart couldn't hear himself on in the overtime. His players couldn't hear him, and it was crazy. I watched this post game. One of the Ole Miss beat writers that I'm good friends with, he even said that after I texted him, what'd you think about the atmosphere and stuff like that, and we sat there and talked about it a little bit. He said that in overtime, you go back to I believe it was either the false start delay game. I believe it was a false start
Hmm.
penalty that
Yeah.
backed him up eventually to 1st and 25. He said that Lane Kiffin was yelling from the sideline to one of the receivers to go in motion.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't hear anything, and
Hmm.
when you can't even do and Jace, you've been around, you covered high school football, college football, like it's like when you can't even do a silent snap count because the
Hmm.
place is so loud, like that's real atmosphere. That's the big leagues. That's grown man football that Ole Miss had to deal with on Saturday night.
Yeah, I got a chance to talk to a couple of Ole Miss beat writers on this show, previewing this game, and I was
Mhm.
asking them who has the most pressure to win this game.
Yeah.
Is it LSU or is it Ole Miss? And you just had the feeling that Ole Miss has put a bunch of stock into this year's team, whether it's
Yeah.
NIL, the transfer portal, you name it. They put a lot of stock for this to be the year that the Ole Miss Rebels make the playoffs, and to have two losses right when we get into October. It's yeah, I mean that's not exactly what Ole Miss fans have pictured, as everybody can tell, but it just seemed like for whatever reason LSU just hung in there. Like Ole Miss seemed like that they were a step ahead for the majority of the football game, but the problem was, and clearly when the post game press conferences from Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart, those comments like we should have won this game. We just let it
Yeah.
slip away. We just weren't able to get up by two possessions, get that knockout punch. He just let LSU hang around for the entirety of the game, and you saw the results when you let LSU hang around at their place in Tiger Stadium at night. That's definitely a no-no, and Ole Miss it cost them at the end.
Yeah, and I think, you kind of you talked about, Lane Kiffin's post-game comments. Jackson Dart was, I think, distraught would be
Yeah.
one of the biggest words for it. I mean, you know, I agree with him. Like, I don't know how
Mhm,
Ole Miss lost that game. It
mhm,
felt like Jace. I mean, you go back to the very first part of the game where they throw the deep pass on the first drive to Cherry
mhm.
Harris. If he catches that, we all in the press box said that's six. Like that's a
Yeah.
touchdown.
Yep.
It kind of felt like Ole Miss should have been up 21 to nothing.
Mhm,
And I don't know, and I'll plug it for them. But if you haven't already, it used to be known as LSU Gold. It's now LSU Plus. It's like a behind the scenes kind of look docu series they
sure.
do for every athletic program. But they just released the football one, and I was watching that last night. And Blake Baker, and I'd heard this stat, but on social media, and I was like, well, I need to go fact check that and make sure it's right.
Mhm,
Blake Baker even said it in the huddle right before the final drive where Jordan Gilbert makes the tackle to force a field goal. And he said, guys, they've been down here 6 times, meaning the red zone. They've only scored 13 points. And I just think you can't win SEC games, much less
mhm,
a championship, if you're only getting 13 points in the red zone.
mhm,
I know LSU fans have been frustrated at times with the inability to punch it in.
mhm,
Ole Miss felt that, and I think that was a big turning point. Ole Miss had plenty of opportunities, like you said, to put LSU away early. And look, when you let somebody hang around that you're probably better than on paper, and let's be honest, Vegas, a lot of people thought Ole Miss was better on paper.
mhm.
I picked Ole Miss to win. I
Yeah,
thought Ole Miss was the better team in
yeah,
terms of just what you saw on paper. But when you allow that to happen and you let that happen, man, that's the recipe for what happened on Saturday night. And if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I am frustrated, and I do agree with what you were talking about when you mentioned your conversation with some Ole Miss beat writers. This felt like a bigger game for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss because two things: the rumor mill of Lane Kiffin to Florida is going to fire up full speed
mhm,
now, and I was talking about this on my own podcast the other day. I think Jace, a really good case study is what we're going to see with what happens with Ole Miss is when you have that amount of guys that you didn't bring them all in at the same time in terms of high school ranks. Yes, they have relationships, but nothing like a bond of 3 or 4 years together.
mhm.
When your season's goals are kind of no longer in play, what is the chemistry like in the locker room? Not suggesting there could be issues, but I
Right.
think it's an interesting case study for a team that is primarily made up of kids that have been, together for less than a year. I mean, I think that's something interesting to kind of watch.
Yeah, we'll see how this Ole Miss team does respond. I mean, crazier things have happened, but
Hmm.
I mean, Jackson Dart said we have to win out, and even if that is the case, like that's not even guaranteed. Even if
Yeah,
you do win out, so and they got Georgia, I believe, on their schedule.
yeah,
So
they've got
yeah,
Georgia left, and so yeah, you got.
it's
I
gonna be
mean,
tough. It's
the
gonna be
SEC's
tough.
crazy.
It's been a crazy year. Saturday was definitely a crazy game. Let's talk about the defense first, Bryce.
Hmm.
About for LSU's defense, because I mean I wrote an article about it about yesterday about how LSU's defense has improved, and you want to see that benchmark of how much they've improved over a year. Just look at this game over a
Yeah,
year time frame. Last year, obviously, LSU's offense, they did their part. I mean, scored 49 points, 600 yards of offense, and unfortunately, you gave up 55 points and over 700 yards of offense, and that proved to be the difference. Well, this year, LSU's offense struck despite the ending and despite how Garrett Nussmeier's heroics and the Lacey and Anderson plays and all that, but it was LSU's defense that really allowed this to happen throughout the entirety of the game when the offense was struggling. And you can see that this part of the year, like Brian Kelly said at the beginning of the year, that this defense isn't ready to win a game for us. But
Yeah.
this was a huge game against Ole Miss that they are starting to make that transition of being able to be not only a competent defense, which we thought they could be, but like getting back to this defense having a chance to win some games.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And there was a lot of conversation in the offseason about how much you could improve, how much was it realistic, and I think a lot of people, and including myself, Jace, I thought this was going to have to be a master class by the staff. It's not a knock on the kids that are in that
Hmm.
program. I just don't think that this is still, in terms of Jimmy's and Joe's, this is
Hmm.
still where LSU wants
Hmm.
to be. I mean, but the job done, and man, I think I have asked about 65 questions about this guy.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah, Blake Baker's done a great job. Bo Davis done a great job. Corey Raymond has done a good job. And I know you asked that question on Monday. Kevin Peoples, that
Yeah,
might be the hire of the offseason.
I
And not
agree.
just
I agree.
because of, you're seeing production, but the old adage, and I almost asked Braden Swinson this, but I didn't know how he would react. But he's a pretty, fun, good natured guy. So maybe he'd have liked it. The old adage of you can't teach an old dog new tricks. LSU's got two proverbial old dogs on the
Hmm.
edge position,
Yeah.
Savion Jones and Braden Swinson. They've been around a long time. And I think with guys like that, it would have been very easy knowing that this is their last year of college football. It's like, yeah, I appreciate this, but you're here for the young guys. And that's all we've heard. The Deshaun Womacs, the Gabriel Relifords, like we've heard that. No, these guys built relationships. These
Mhm.
guys really took to, hey, this is my last year here. What can I make out of it? And Jason, I mean, I'm no NFL draft expert, but
Mhm.
Braden
Yeah.
Swinson's made himself some money this
Oh, yeah,
season. I mean,
already.
he's top 5 in the country in sacks, second in the country or second in the SEC behind Kyle Kennard, just a
Mhm.
half a sack down from him. This is an LSU defense that's averaging 3.5 sacks through SEC play. So to your point, Jace, yes, there is a difference. Now, you take all that into account. I think that Whit Weeks has grown and matured.
Mhm.
That's been a big piece of the puzzle.
Mhm.
And then I think you a legitimate cornerback one, you could say in
Yeah.
Zy Alexander that you didn't have last year. He goes down to the Army game and you're just shuffling, and it's not their fault. A bunch of young guys that really don't have a lot of experience. We've
Mhm.
seen Ashton Stamp screw up. So I think there's still some issues on the back end,
Sure.
but it's being covered up, Jace, by the fact that your pass rush has been, I mean, it's been elite. This is
Mhm.
an elite pass rush that LSU has. I believe they're top 5 when you look at obviously sacks and team sacks. They are top 5 in pressure rate. I mean, they are making life uncomfortable for opposing
Mhm.
offenses. And that might have been the biggest surprise because you were out there at fall camp and I was like, yeah, I think this group can be good, but I don't think
Yeah.
anybody thought it'd be what we see right now.
Right. I mean, once in a while, I mean, you were able to
Mhm.
see Braden Swinson maybe win a rep against Emory or like Savion win a rep against Will Campbell. That's like every once in a blue moon, but that just shows you how good those tackles are. But yeah, it's crazy to see this group just really explode like they're doing. And I was talking to a lot of our guys, a lot of the LSU beat writers about if this LSU defense can they just be a playmaking defense? You know, if they
Yeah.
give up the big play, they give up touchdowns. Well, can you force turnovers? Because the way the offense is structured, they could maybe control the clock, and if they win the turnover ratio, this could be a team that can win heavily on that. And this has been a team that's been making a lot of plays. But to your point, Bryce, there's been somebody at each level of the defense that has stepped up for this LSU defense. You talk about
Yeah.
Braden Swinson, especially in the Ole Miss game. Braden Swinson, you saw what Weeks do at the linebacker position. Zy Alexander, and you're happy for him that he's returning to the field. First of all, off the injury he suffered last year. I know there's a couple of injuries he suffered this year, but you love for him to bounce back like he's been playing, and you're seeing it's the same person. It's mostly the same personnel, like you said from last year.
Mhm.
Except maybe a couple like Jordan Gilbert, maybe one or two guys here and there, a couple freshmen here and there, but it's mostly the same personnel. from last year. And this defense, it shows you the coaching staff and already the waves that they're making on that side of the football.
Yeah, and I wanted to shout out because Braden Swinson was asked last night about that 4th and 1 play. And I think,
Yeah.
I did a film breakdown over on Go 24/7 through kind of some of the big momentum plays, and
Hmm.
Swinson gets a lot of the credit. What's crazy to me, Jace, is that Swinson told us there wasn't a play call because
Hmm.
Ole Miss was running tempo. They get down there, and obviously Lane Kiffin, the play caller that he is, he's going to want to catch you off balance. Well, he did,
Yeah.
and Swinson listed himself, Savion Jones, and Gio Paez as guys that
Hmm.
made that play happen. And I
Yeah.
think it's just kind of a microcosm of, yes, there's young talent on this defense. And I
Right.
was very outspoken about, I think that the young talent is more, and look, you cover recruiting as well. So, you know, I'm talking about like more God given talent, like just
Hmm.
naturally athletically gifted, maybe more than what the veterans were on the roster. But
Sure.
Gio Paez shoots the gap, completely shuts down any pressure in the middle. Savion Jones seals off the back edge, and then Braden Swinson able to make a play. That's three guys with a lot of college football experience in that front seven. And so shout out Gio Paez. Look, the fact that we, and all respect to him, the
Hmm.
fact that we haven't had to talk about the loss of Jacoby and Guillory much is,
Yeah.
I think, a credit to what Gio Paez, you know,
Hmm.
JVR Suggs, and a lot of these guys, Ahmad Bro, Parrish Shan, have done in the middle of the defense. So to your point, this is a special group, and I hate to ever move back the goalposts on expectations, but like Glenn and I were talking about this on our podcast, now that you've beaten Ole Miss, and I guess this may segue you into Arkansas a little bit, but
Hmm.
it really does set up the rest of your schedule. You control everything. You don't have a
Hmm.
conference loss. Not that you ever want to lose a game, Jace, but you do have, let's say, a mulligan that you can utilize, essentially, because you've beaten a very quality team on your schedule. So it's a tough sledding the rest of the way. I mean, hey, even Vanderbilt coming into Tiger Stadium is going to make
Oh,
fans a little bit uneasy. There's not an easy game left on that
no.
schedule, so it'll be
No.
interesting to watch how it turns out. But like you said, I've been very impressed with this defense, and they carried this team until the offense could mount that big drive there at the end.
Yeah, like you said, Bryce, it's a toss up. I mean, you can see it going either way, really, starting with Arkansas on Saturday. But before we talk about Arkansas, let's talk about the offense just a little bit
Yeah,
from the Ole Miss game. Uh, Garrett Nussmeier, he admitted, I mean, in the post game, that this was the worst performance of his career. Well, that's a pretty good performance to have your worst game of your career. Well, it was the ending that was so great about it, but it was kind of just chunky a little bit, offensively, clunky. I guess you would have to say a better word for it, clunky
hmm,
offensively. Earlier, and it seemed like LSU was trying to go for like the deep shots a lot early in that game, and finally, with no really separation, really, you got to give credit to Ole Miss cornerbacks and defensive backs. There wasn't really too much separation from the Ole
yeah,
Miss, from the LSU receivers, but you saw LSU in the second half. You saw Joe Sloan. They were working the intermediate middle of the field a little bit more, and that proved to be a difference maybe late in that first half, going to the second half. But Garrett Nussmeier, we had the ultimate Garrett Nussmeier experience. The two interceptions, but he still battled back. And what's best about Garrett Nussmeier is with his gunslinger mentality. It might be frustrating to watch sometimes, but he doesn't let the last play affect him. I mean,
yeah,
he's always going for the deep shot. He's always attacking downfield. He doesn't shy away from that. That actually helped them come back and win that game, make those tight throws like he did to Aaron Anderson. And I think there was a shot with Wilson Alexander. I think he screenshot the play and
hmm,
how before the throw was even thrown and how tight the coverage was to Aaron Anderson on that touchdown catch on fourth down. But the last two plays is what everybody's going to talk. The last two throws is what everybody's going to talk about. The touchdown to Anderson and the touchdown to Kyron Lacey, really putting themselves in Tigers Stadium lore. But your evaluation of Garrett Nussmeier this season, Bryce, and you've seen him just three times already, and he's only started a couple of
yeah.
games. He's led LSU to fourth quarter comeback drives.
You talk about a kid that, I mean, we're still talking about Garrett Nussmeier as if he's this grizzled vet, and Jace, I mean, he only has what, 6 games, 7, 8,
Mhm.
8 games under his belt, and truly. I mean, that
Yeah.
second half against Georgia in the SEC title game, okay, I'll give you that one. The fourth quarter or third or fourth quarter against Alabama last year, and then what's
Mhm.
happened this season. I mean, this is a guy who has all the intangibles, and I think it's a big reason why you've seen him kind of really rise on draft boards because I think people
Mhm.
fall in love with what's in between the ears with Garrett Nussmeier. And that's not to suggest he doesn't have the tools. I mean, he has every single tool in the
Mhm.
book, in my opinion. He can make off-platform throws. He can do a lot of different things. But you pointed out just and wanted to know the evaluation. It might be a cop out answer, Jace, but I really do kind of echo what Brian Kelly said post game. This is a growth game. And
Mhm.
I loved that take because, yeah, he didn't play well.
Mhm.
There's no doubt about it. Like, I mean, he played poorly in the
Mhm.
first two and a half, 3 quarters. They had the one drive to go score a touchdown that I thought he was surgical on. And
Yeah.
then, you get to the fourth quarter, and there's something to say about his ability to say, yep, haven't played well, thrown some bad balls, made some bad decisions, can't do anything about it. And I've got to go win this football game. And
Yeah.
look, I know here on Gridiron Football, you guys have the chance to talk to a lot of young quarterbacks. I mean, go
Mhm. Yeah.
watch how Garrett Nussmeier handled himself, the adversity he had to go through in terms of making bad decisions. And a lot of that adversity was that he brought on himself in making those wrong decisions. So I just think that um, the ability to flip the switch for him was something that you just don't really see kids get, especially
Mhm.
with the lack of actual game reps like he does. I know he's been in the program for a long time. We've talked about that, all off season, and that was a massive
Mhm.
talking point. But I just think it's really impressive the fact that he could flip that switch, understands the moment, and then you mentioned that throw to Aaron Anderson. I don't think people understand how good of a throw that was. Like when
Mhm.
Garrett Nussmeier threw that ball, Aaron Anderson wasn't open. That's called
Mhm.
throwing your receivers open. And I think
Mhm.
that's what, I texted an NFL scout, Sunday afternoon. And I said, hey, just this one play. He said, that's an NFL throw. Like that's the kind of stuff that people say this guy makes other players around him better. And I think we can all see, this is a guy who he lifts his teammates up. He encourages them. These guys love playing with him. And
Mhm.
so it makes for a fun game. It makes for a fun potential season, but I like his growth. I think you also kind of have to maybe live and die with a couple of decisions he makes, but
Mhm.
your best bet is that he's going to make more good than bad, and I think he's
Mhm.
trending in that direction as they kind of enter the meat of SEC play.
Yeah, it's crazy considering that this is only a couple of stars because you saw
Yeah,
how clunky it was at times for Joe Burrow in his first year starting for LSU, and same thing for
yeah,
Jaden Daniels, and then it seems like it's crazy to think, but he's playing at a higher level than they were their first year starting. So it
yeah,
is unbelievable what he's doing right now, and the ascension that he's had for this football team. And a lot of credit goes to the offensive line as well. I mean, I know they're getting a lot of criticism for the run game and what's been going on with the run game, but I mean, he hasn't been really been touched, if at all, this year, and it's really gives credit to the offensive line for what they're able to do. But leading into that, Bryce, how
hmm
what does LSU need to do on the ground in order to get the most of this offense? I mean, you're not really expecting 300 yards rushing on the ground and averaging 10 yards a carry, anything like that. But what does this offense need to do to get the maximum of the run game to help out? Because we know this passing offense is elite. To help out
yeah.
this passing offense get ahead of the chains a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to get Caden Durham back 100%. I don't think he was 100%. He obviously kind of had an injury that lingered after that South Alabama game, and I don't think it's anything serious to where he obviously was able to play last Saturday. But Jace, we've seen this team. I mean, LSU hasn't had in terms of a running back. They haven't had a guy dynamic as him and what he can provide.
Hmm.
uh, what 3, 4, 5? I mean, seriously, like you
Yeah.
go back and you look. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a guy who was to me most effective out of the passing game.
Yeah.
And so, Caden Durham can be that, but in terms of a guy you can turn and hand it off to, you may have to go pre 2019 in terms of what they
Mm.
could really, really do. So I think that that's your wild card. If he gets 110% healthy, you can go back to some of these zone outside runs that I think fits this offensive line the best because
Mhm.
what do we know about this offensive line? Will Campbell is uber athletic. Emory Jones is uber athletic. I think what we're seeing right now is that inside the tackles, you can
Hmm.
have some success. But getting these guys outside zone scheme runs
Yeah.
is that's where they can free flow. I mean, when you see Emory Jones, Garrett Downs, when you see these jokers pull as a linebacker or a safety, not a fun sight. Not a
No.
fun sight when you
No.
come down to play the run fit and there's a big 300, 20-pound guy barreling your way. So I think that's where they're most effective. If you get him back healthy, Jace, I mean, honestly, this team can go win the SEC title. Like if
Hmm.
this defense keeps playing like this
Hmm.
and you can find that run game balance to where it doesn't have to run for 250 yards a game, but he can balance it with like 70 to 125 yards a game, him, and then you offset that with Josh Williams, who I think can give you 50 to 60 yards and whatever they can give you in the passing game. Like that's that complementary football that Brian Kelly's talked about between offense and defense, but also just offensively. Like, can you play complementary off of that so to where you don't get in a situation where a team goes, well, we're just going to drop 8 and force Nussmeier to throw. Like that's what we're going to do. And if you can be balanced, this team can play in Atlanta in December and potentially host a playoff game. Like that, I think that's the ceiling we have to talk
Hmm.
about with this team because that run game's pivotal. You're
Yeah.
exactly right. Joe Sloan's going to want to pass the ball. That's the bread and butter. They're not going to get away from that. But this is something where they found in Caden Durham. Use his athleticism and just keep evolving that. Get him healthy and let's kind of see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, he's a home run hitter. I mean, anytime he gets the football, I mean, he has potential to take it to the house, and he brings that extra dimension that as solid as Josh Williams is, and
Yeah,
and the type of role Caleb Jackson brings to the table, that he just has something different. I mean, and that
yeah,
different elite speed that the other two don't have. And you mentioned with the offensive line, some of their best running plays this year have been with guys pulling out in front. So we'll see if LSU can incorporate more of that as the season goes on. And you just hope that. And what's scary about this offense, Bryce, is that you're down a couple of your receivers. I mean, CJ Daniels is expected to come back, which is a good sign. And we still trying to figure out what's going on right now with Chris Hilton. But when you get this wide receiver core back to full strength, and the biggest topic of discussion from Brian Kelly's press conference was Trades Green being more involved in the slot. Man, the
hmm
potential for this offense, and they're still kind of scratching the surface right now, is absolutely insane.
yeah. No, you're exactly right. I mean, I'm looking at some of the statistics right here of what you're able to do and how they're able to spread the ball out. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. Brian Kelly talked about on Monday. He was asked a question about Trades Green. Kid's a matchup nightmare. I mean, that slant route that he ran near the goal line, you can't defend that. There's not
Mhm.
a player. You know what type of player defends that? A Harold Perkins type player, a guy
Right,
that's big
right.
enough to body him up, but also can
Mhm,
play in the pass. And there's not a lot of Harold Perkins running around. That's the problem. So Green's a matchup nightmare. I expect to see him utilize the pass game kind of out in that slot a little bit more. We talked about the running backs earlier. I mean, that's something you can definitely do. But Jace, I mean, Kyron Lacey, for a second there, I was like, "Oh no, his season might be over." Like that
yeah,
in that
yeah.
that 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 when he tweaked his knee, or what
It did
we
not
thought
look
was his
good at
knee.
all
I
live.
mean, it looked like. I mean, just to be honest, it looked like torn ACL done
It
for the
did.
year type of stuff.
It did.
And when he came back out there, he's got that dog mentality. I mean, that's the best way
Mhm.
to put it. He's
Like
just
the
got
next
that, and
play too. It was like the
yes,
next play
the
after
next play he
that.
comes out and makes a big grab. So I was very impressed with that. And then just the development of Aaron Anderson. I mean, that was a
Mhm,
guy for me that I thought coming into the season, if he didn't carve out a role, he might lose his opportunity at
mhm,
LSU. I mean, this was the opportunity. This was the year. He's taken full advantage of it. Would love to see Xavion Thomas worked more in, but they've got weapons, man. Mason Taylor's obviously in that category. So, you kind of go down the list. You get CJ Daniels back, who he's not going to put up the numbers that he had at Liberty last year because
mhm.
LSU has so much talent. But that guy's a big body receiver that can make some catches over the middle and catches down to the goal line where other guys can't really defend him. So I think at full strength, this wide receiving core, I don't know how you match up with them. I don't think there's a safety that can guard certain players. There's not a corner that can lock up a Kyron Lacey, for a full 60 minutes. So very impressed with the developments they've made in the passing game, and I think it's going to be something kind of to watch going forward because it's not just force feeding like it was, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas
Sure.
last year. And
Mhm,
and I get it, like the first round picks. That's why you do that.
mhm.
They're really spreading the ball around, and it's hard to defend for an opposing defensive coordinator.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I was with you. at fall practice and saying that
Mhm.
this. I mean, it's crazy to say with losing two first round draft picks at receiver, but this is a deeper core. And a lot of guys that can step up and make big
Yeah.
plays, and they've definitely had this year. Obviously, guys were joined by Bryce Koon. Make sure to give him a follow if y'all haven't already at Bryce_Koon. Him and Glenn do an excellent job with the beat. They do a lot of great stuff, a lot of great stories, and you can catch them on their podcast as well. They do an awesome job. So make sure to give them a follow, Tiger fans. Y'all haven't gotten a chance to do that. And at this spot, let's talk a little bit about the Arkansas game coming up, Bryce.
Yeah.
This spot reminds me, and this is when I first started writing for Gridiron Football, was 2022, and this was right after the Alabama win with a 2 point
Mm.
conversion, crazy atmosphere, crazy stadium, in Tiger Stadium, crazy crowd, emotional win on the last
Yeah.
play of the game, and then very next week you go to Arkansas, and Arkansas always plays LSU up no matter what. It's just what it is in this rivalry, and LSU, if it wasn't for Harold Perkins off the edge, they probably don't win that game against Arkansas.
Mhm.
Now you're in a similar situation here. High emotional win over a top 10 team, an Ole Miss like Alabama 2 years ago. And guess what? You're going to have to play after that. You're going to have to go on the road again to play Arkansas. So a little deja vu vibes for this game, Bryce. How worried should the Tigers be? Because I mean, Tennessee was rolling top four, top five team. They get upset against Arkansas at their place, and Arkansas always loves to give them their best shot. So,
Yeah.
how worried are you about this game, and should LSU be in upset mode going into this one?
I think fans and this team should be wary of what can
Mhm.
happen. And you alluded to a lot of the reasons why there. I mean, this is a team that, like you talked about, I mean, when you look at betting odds in Vegas and how they look at this stuff, like LSU's a prime candidate for the emotional letdown. You were so high. Every coach wants to believe in the 24-hour rule, Jace, but how is that actually applied into that week of
Sure.
practice? So I think that it's a team in LSU that the difference being, and I'm actually working on a piece, and people can check it out over and go 24/7 about this. Where I talked with Josh Williams yesterday,
Hmm.
and how do you handle it? Like he's a guy who's been around. He's
Yeah.
seen the highest to highs, and he's seen some low lows at LSU during
Yeah.
his career. So how do you handle success? Like this is a team now that you're no longer the hunter. Like now you're going to be the hunted
Mhm.
if you're LSU. You're going to be
Mhm.
the team that has the target on your back. And look, Arkansas, LSU fans can make fun of them, but it's a team that has postseason aspirations. They've only got one
Mhm.
SEC loss. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, they could run the table hypothetically. I mean, look, crazy
Mhm.
things are happening in the SEC. Anything can
Oh, yeah.
happen. So, to that point, you have to be wary of what could happen on Saturday in Fayetteville. It's going to be a tough environment. That road environment can get hostile. But I asked Josh Williams, and he said you have we have this saying that Brian Kelly mentions, and I thought this was really good. He said you rest and you reset, and then you refocus. Rest, reset, refocus. Because he said, if first off, if you don't rest, then you can't get for lack of better words, the ability to reset and refocus. That has to
Mhm.
be first. So whether it's Sunday or whatever it is, you have to do that. And then you reset. You say, hey, that was fun. Completely new opponent. Nothing that we did last week matters this week. And I kind of posed the question to Josh like that. And he goes, you refocus. You have to understand the opportunity that you have at hand. And so, you talk about the wild, the wackiness of the SEC this season. I mean, Jace, I think it fits right in the narrative. Like you can't assume anything. There's good football is played in this conference each and every single week. There's more parity than ever in the
Mhm.
SEC. I mean, Vanderbilt beat Alabama, folks. Like
Right. Right.
it's like it doesn't matter where you go. There's good ball players everywhere. The portal has allowed for guys to be able to do what's best for them, and I think it's helped out maybe the bottom to mid tier of the
Mhm.
SEC, and we're seeing that. So you go to Arkansas where Sam Pittman's arguably saved his job. A
Yep.
guy that was potential on the chopping block. It's going to be a hostile environment. This one means a lot, and historically, Jace, these games come down to the last 5-6 minutes or so. I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of fans forget LSU is very close to losing this game. They had to be perfect. in the second half and scoring opportunities
Yeah.
to be able to knock off Arkansas inside Tiger Stadium. So I think it's gonna be a great football game. You have to, like Josh Williams said, you have to rest, you have to reset, and you got to refocus. You have to do those three things to be able to kind of turn the page and say, hey, new opponent. Last week was fun, but they're not going to give us the win just because we beat Ole Miss last week.
Right, right. This is really this 3 game stretch, and this is before they're really going into the bye week because LSU is going to be up for that Alabama game. But really, this
Mhm.
3 game stretch is critical for LSU to see where they want to go at the end of the season, uh, because you got Ole Miss, you just were able to beat them. Now you got
Yeah,
Arkansas, and then you got A&M on the road again. So it's a
yeah.
tough 3 game stretch, and to me, Bryce, this is going to define the season. Even though there's 4 tough games at the end of the season, I think this
Mhm.
3 game stretch is going to define the season for
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's, you mentioned we hadn't talked about the Alabama game yet. We
LSU.
haven't talked about the Vanderbilt game,
Yeah,
but
right,
it's
right,
it's
right.
it's a 3 game stretch. Um, it's a 3 game stretch that should you have an opportunity to make a statement. You've
Hmm.
made one, but you're far from any type of finality in terms of being able to stake
Hmm.
your claim in the SEC. You go beat Arkansas, you go beat A&M, and people are not going to talk about you as a playoff sleeper. They're going to say,
Hmm.
"Hey, this is a team that could go maybe win the whole dang thing." So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see, and it's going to be interesting to see if this LSU team, if I mean that's what the USC loss hurts the most because you could be sitting up here undefeated and maybe say, hey, maybe we can slip up maybe once or twice. Um,
Yeah.
Bryce, what do you think if this LSU team slips? Let's say they lose 1 game in a stretch and they finish the
Mm.
season 10-2. What do you think? Do you think LSU fits in there? The
I
playoff
think that
playoff?
well, I'll tell you this. I put out a projected playoff, just my thoughts heading into week 8, and I had LSU in as the 10 seed. And Jace, I'll be honest with you, I have them as a 10-2 team, not
Mhm.
making it
Yeah.
to Atlanta as a 10-2 team. College Station scares me because
Yeah, it
just
does too.
LSU's history
Yeah.
there. A&M's a solid football team. I don't think they're
Mhm.
great, but they're a good football team, and I
Mhm.
think A&M could benefit Jace, from what LSU benefited last Saturday night. Home
Yeah.
crowd. I expect
Yeah.
that to be a raucous atmosphere. So I think so. I mean, I think there's going to be a plethora of teams in the SEC that finish with 2 to 3 losses. When you
Mhm.
start to look at the resume, winning against Ole Miss was imperative. Like I said,
Mhm.
if you lose to USC, you probably can't lose to Ole Miss and Alabama. You got really got to win both of those games. I
Yeah.
think they can beat Alabama. This is probably the most
Mhm.
beatable Alabama team we've seen in what 20 years.
Yeah.
It probably is. So that being said, you've got a great opportunity.
Mhm.
10-2, they're going to have a tough time keeping LSU out if it's a close loss. Let's say it's a 3 point loss on the road at A&M, and let's say
Mhm.
A&M trends, in the positive direction that they keep going. That's another good team whose only losses to a top 20 Notre Dame team. So
Mhm.
it's going to be interesting. But the best thing, Jace, is just go win out and
Yeah.
be one of those top
Control your
4 seeds where you can just hang out and don't have to worry about that first round matchup.
Right, right. Control your own destiny, and LSU does have that right now. They
Yeah.
can control their destiny for what they want to do, their goals that they achieve at the beginning of the season. Taylon Green, Bryce, I know that was Boise State transfer quarterback for Arkansas. He is a dangerous runner. We know that, and
Hmm.
dangerous athlete, but he has been dealing with some injuries, and I know that he's been practicing this week, but it's going to be one of those things. Like we saw it with Norris Sellers for South Carolina
Yeah.
against LSU, and you saw how he was before the injury. And if he was healthy, the rest of that game, LSU probably does not win that game against South Carolina. And you saw
Yeah.
how effective he was with the injury. So that should be the biggest question because LSU has proven to struggle against some of these dual threat quarterbacks that can really burn you with their legs.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Was talking with our counterparts, the Arkansas website over on 24/7
Mhm.
Sports earlier today, and he mentioned he goes, I don't know if their beat writer Trey Biddy said I don't know if he's going to be 100%. I think that's going to lead to them playing a redshirt freshman Malachi Singleton a little
Mhm.
bit who does give you another dual threat. It's dual threat and dual threat on that depth
Yeah.
chart for Arkansas. And look, Bobby Petrino's a good play caller,
Oh yeah.
and he's going to dial some stuff up. He understands the nature of this rivalry. He understands what it would mean for Arkansas to beat LSU, now a top 10 team at home, and what it could do to galvanize the Razorbacks the rest of the season. So I think there's going to be a good game plan in place, Jace. I think it's going to be something, too, where LSU is going to have to be disciplined. I know you recall this. Brian Kelly in the postgame saying DYJ very
Yep.
aggressively to a reporter. Do
Yep.
your
Yep.
job.
Your job.
And
Yep.
he's right, though. I mean, this team, and I think I understand his frustration now because you
Hmm.
saw what happens when they do their job. They can be
Hmm.
very good. When they don't, it can be very bad. The line or the margin of error for this LSU defense is very, very thin, in my opinion.
Hmm.
But when they do it right, it looks really good. So, Taylor Green, Malachi Singleton, whoever it is back there for Arkansas on Saturday can give LSU fits. But look, Arkansas's offensive line, that's Sam Pittman's bread and butter.
Yeah.
They hadn't faced anything like what LSU has the front seven
Hmm.
wise and those edge rushers. So it's going to be an interesting battle. I do agree with you. That's the biggest question because Arkansas is going to have to start off fast, much like
Hmm.
I think a lot of the game plan was with South Carolina and Lenore Sellers.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. Going to be a fun ball game. There's no doubt about that.
Right. And if you're LSU, you want to start fast too. You don't want to get their crowd involved in the game and let them feel like that they have a chance
Mm-hmm.
to win. And I feel like that's what Ole Miss dropped the ball the most was they had opportunities to go up maybe 13-0, 17-0, and did not do
Yeah.
that. And you saw what happened. So if you're LSU, you got to be able to pounce on them early and like get off to a great start, keep the crowd out the game. So we'll see how good LSU can do in that regard. Um, so, Bryce, before we go and plug your stuff and finish the show, how do you see this game? I'm sure you're going to be writing some game preview articles and predictions and all that. But how do you see this game resulting for LSU after the big win against Ole Miss?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something, Jace, to the idea of an emotional letdown. I
Mm-hmm.
want to believe, as a lot of the fans want to believe, that that's not going to affect LSU. That affects other teams. It doesn't affect LSU.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a game where Arkansas is going to have the momentum. They may swing first. They may land a big punch early. But to me, this LSU team, when you look across the SEC, this is probably, and I don't know if I'm going out on a limb and saying this, this LSU team is probably the most successful slash battle tested team so far this season. And what I mean by that
Mm-hmm.
is they've been on the ropes, but they've
Yeah.
also found ways to win the ugly games. And that
Mm-hmm.
says something where other teams have been on the ropes and they hadn't been able to win the games. So, and then the teams that are undefeated, for lack of better words, in SEC play, you've got LSU, A&M, and Texas.
Yeah.
Texas to me hasn't been, challenged necessarily. They get challenged this week against Georgia, but they haven't been challenged to the
Yeah.
extent and haven't had to face that adversity. A&M maybe has a little bit, but man, I mean, LSU, Jace could be 4-3, could be 3-3 right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, very well, and that says something to me. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
they have been battle tested, the fact that they have not just seen, not just looked defeat in the eyes, but it's been there and then
Mm-hmm.
still found a way to win the football game. That speaks a lot. So, kind of getting back to the question, I think LSU wins a close one.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is, within a touchdown type of game because it's,
Yeah.
it's just it's a crazy rivalry game. But I've got the Tigers going to Arkansas and winning a tough one and setting up for what I think is going to be an unbelievable matchup in College Station next weekend.
Oh, I believe so too. This is one of those tricky games. No matter what, this has always been one of those games that LSU fans don't really see Arkansas as a
Hmm.
rival. Arkansas fans do, and no matter what, no matter how good LSU is, no matter how good Arkansas is, and vice versa, uh, this has been a game that's always been close, no matter what. You saw it in Tiger Stadium last year. Like you said, mentioned earlier, Jaden Daniels had to score every time he touched the ball in the second half in order to
Yeah.
win that football game last year. So it's gonna be a great game, a great atmosphere in Fayetteville, and we'll see if LSU can really show that growth that Brian Kelly talked about. One of his mature teams he's coached. We'll see how much a mature group this is going to Fayetteville. Well, Bryce, I appreciate you coming on the Chase with Jace and talking some LSU football with me. Anything going on? Obviously, a lot going on at 247 with you and Glenn. anything that you want to promote, whether it's the podcast or anything going on 247 that you like to promote.
Yeah, obviously, you want to come hang out with a great group of LSU fans. You can sign up. I believe it's $1 for your first month over at Go 24/7. It's a fun community. We talk everything from LSU football, basketball season right around the corner, and there's never a bad time to talk LSU baseball with fall ball happening as we speak. So it's a good time. Head over there, and then obviously, if you want to check out our podcast, it's the Go 24/7 podcast right there on YouTube. You can just type that in, and you can find all the content we do, recruit interviews. We've got highlights, we've got all different kind of stuff that you want to check out. So it's a good time. And Jace, like I said, I do appreciate it, man. Always love talking college football, and glad we could link up for this one because this was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Bryce. Always a pleasure. You're more than welcome to come on anytime, my man. And I'm sure we'll talk. We'll talk before the season is over for sure and see how the Tigers are doing.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank y'all for watching. Please make sure give Bryce a follow at Bryce_Koon. And guys, we'll check out next week. Make sure to catch our coverage of LSU football. You can find us at GridironFootballUSA.com. We got some great feature stories already. Obviously, the game recap. We also wrote a feature piece on the LSU defense and how much they've improved since the Ole Miss game last year, and a couple more great stuff. So make sure to follow us. Obviously, at GridironFootballUSA.com. Follow us on social media. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. And guys, we'll see you all next week on another exciting edition of The Chase with Jace.